The Philadelphia 76ers look like they're back. It is still a long season ahead, but this team has some people believing right now. We're going to break it all down and see if it's too early to tell for the Philadelphia 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? You're locked on with the Philadelphia 76ers. We're your hosts, Keith Pompey and Kayla Santiago. Thank you for joining us. So Joel Embiid has a big game in his game back after being out for some time. It looked positive for the Philadelphia 76ers. Tyrese Maxey with a big performance, but it's still a long season ahead. We are going to touch on all of that. Before we get started, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $100 and $50 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Make sure you visit FanDuel.com to get started. So my takeaway is that the Philadelphia 76ers no longer need to tank at this moment in the season and really looking on the upside for this team. Now, it has been one game where Joel Embiid has been able to perform. But what I will say is Joel met expectations. And by saying that, he's supposed to have 30-plus games. He's a franchise player. What we saw for him before in his season debut was really, really low expectations. Not even having a game, that wasn't his debut, but having a game in a situation where he didn't even go to the charity stripe once. That's unheard of throughout his career. So this team, I'm not going to say that they're destined to be able to push for an Eastern Conference and get a high seed. But I think right now it's the best that Joel Embiid has looked this season so far. Tyrese Maxey able to get out of a little bit of slump. And that's something to really look at for this Philadelphia 76ers team that has struggled mightily so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, it is a positive, but right now I think I still need to see a couple more games, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is when we look at it, Joel Embiid, he did miss 7 games. And he was healthy. And I remember once Shaq came out and said, yes, everyone looks great when they don't have to play multiple games in a row, like when they're well rested in the NBA. Now, the one thing that you did say is, 30 points, 31 points. He looked like the all-star he's supposed to be. He made 13 to 28 shots. He had 12 rebounds. He had 2 blocks. I mean, he even 4 assists. He even had 6 turnovers. He was turning the ball over like he normally does. So he looked like Joel Embiid. The only thing is, I want to see how that knee holds up after like 4 or 5 games, right? That's my only pause right now. Is I just want to see how is his knee going to respond when he starts playing multiple games, because let's face it, he's been out for 2 weeks. So he's well rested. So that's my only pause right now.
And the positive thing for Joel Embiid and this team is that they have rest until Friday against the Indiana Pacers, and that game is at home. And then you don't play until Monday the 16th, and then not again until Friday the 20th. And that's against the Hornets both times, one on the road, one at the Wells Fargo Center. But then you go into that back-to-back against the Cavs. So when you look at it right now, and we've said this so many times throughout the season, the 76ers are only going to get far as they can be as this team is currently constructed if Joel Embiid is healthy. How healthy can he be? And when you look at it, you say, okay, yeah, you want to sit him, you want to load manage him. I know that's not really a thing in the NBA anymore. They don't want to get fined, but he might not play back-to-backs. My biggest issue with that is come playoff time, what are you going to do? Are you going to have him play 1 game and then have him sit 4 games because the knee is swelling? Now, I'm looking way ahead and going into the playoffs, but they are making sure that they are on top of this swelling right now, and we're not really going to get the full picture until he plays more of these games. But when you look forward, and if there's a situation where that knee is starting to swell up once again, then you say, okay, are you worried again about the Philadelphia 76ers? Because if Joel Embiid is in the lineup, they're a better team. It's what we look at. It's what we see. He's a very dominant player in the NBA. But at the same time, come playoff time where this team wants to be, it's not going to be like that. You can't take days off. You can't take games off. You want to try to get in and win as many as you can to get where you want to be. And for Joel Embiid, I'm not going to say they're necessarily must-need wins, but I think you need to come out with some really big wins and see how he performs in the stretch in December.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, they get some big wins, but also I think the true test when we can say how good he is and how good the Sixers are basically, let's start with um, December the 20th, right? They're going to play the Hornets. Now, the next night they play the Cleveland Cavaliers. I don't expect him to play in both games, right? But on the 23rd, they play the Spurs. On the 25th, Christmas Day, they're going to play the Boston Celtics. And then on the 28th, and they travel to Utah Jazz. And on the 30th, they're going to play Portland. To me, that's when we're going to get a pretty good idea of how his knee can respond. Because, like you said, I mean, they played on Sunday. They're not going to play again until Friday. And then they'll play again on Monday. And then next thing you know, they don't play again until the following Friday.
Yeah.
So right now, yeah, it's set up for him to be great, like these next 4 games. But again, after that, that's when we're going to find out how can he respond. And we can see that'll give us a barometer, so to speak, on how competitive we can expect this team to be. Is it going to be another one of those things where does he play 4 games like he did last time in 9 days, and then he has this swelling that made him sit out the following 7 games? So there's a lot that we'll learn right then and there just to see, how good Joel can be.
And I think this is the thing. If you look at that, and if that's going to be the constant of the season, where do you look down the line? What do you look in playoffs? Is it even worth it to force Joel to play this season in the sense where he's going to play a chunk of games and then all of a sudden he needs to sit a chunk of games because that knee is starting to swell once again? Because we've said it already. Once you get to the playoffs, there's not really a situation that you can sit out because the 76ers, as it looks right now, they're not going to be the team to beat in the playoffs, right? They're going to be a team that is clawing their way in every single playoff game unless they can really get into some high seeding, which at this point in time, the East isn't the best right now. A lot of teams are starting to fall off. It's still early. But at the same time, the Philadelphia 76ers right now just trying to get into the 8th spot and then move up from there. So it's too early to tell from that standpoint. I think you can't have those conversations until you see how that knee kind of looks. But I'm in agreement with you. The month of December is really big for this team. It's big for Joel Embiid, and it's big for the Philadelphia 76ers because they're in the 12th seed right now at 7-15. And then you look at it and you say, okay, well, the Nets, the Pacers, the Bulls, and the Pistons, they all have 10 wins currently as we stand right now. So they're not too far out of that range where the Nets are sitting at the 8th spot. So there still is a chance that the 76ers can crawl up. And that's why I say this month of December is so important. People, it's not taken away from Joel Embiid's performance, but we do have to be realistic here. It's been 1 game and there's still a lot more to evaluate.
Yeah, you're right. And then we look at it now. If everything works out, you do feel a little optimistic because, like we said, this is a key month for him. But also, we look at it, if everything works out, there are a lot of winnable games for them, right? That they should be able to get. But yeah, to me, it's just, I remember Nick Nurse said something a while, maybe a week ago, when everybody was talking about, do you think it's time to shut Joel down? And when Nick Nurse came back and said, no, he has to play. We have to see how it responds before we figure out. And I think this is the most important stretch going on to the rest of this month, just to see how does it respond. And then they can decide from there, like, hey, do we go after that lottery pick? Do we make some trades? What do we do? I think that a lot of it depends on how he responds, how he recovers from playing, multiple days in a row.
Yeah, there's already some crazy trade rumors out there. We've seen a little bit of Jimmy Butler maybe getting traded from the Heat, but we're going to talk about that probably later on this week with the Philadelphia 76ers. Not saying Joel Embiid's going to be traded, people, but you are right. You look at the situation. If, Joel cannot play, but you still try to want to contend, who do you kind of look at to bring in when that trade deadline comes about? So still a lot to unpack here. Joel Embiid, a really big game, and that was a positive note for the Philadelphia 76ers. We're looking to see if he can keep on doing it. Not could he keep up with it because he is a dominant player, but can that knee keep up? Will it swell? And is a big, important stretch. But his co-star in Tyrese Maxey had a big game getting out of that slump that he was in on the offensive side of things and it was big time for Tyrese Maxey. Those two on the floor, it's good to see them back once again. And hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Make sure you head over to FanDuel right now. It's not just the NBA you can bet on, it's the NHL, the NFL, college hoops, everything in between. You can't even imagine how many things you can place bets on in terms of sports. So be sure to head over today. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Make sure you visit FanDuel.com today. So we have some lines right now. San Fran and the Rams right now. The 49ers -2.5 favorites. If you like that and you want to lock it in, make sure you head over to FanDuel today. These odds can change as the days go on as well before that Thursday night matchup. So be sure to head over to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Be sure to visit FanDuel today. No better place than FanDuel to do so. Tyrese Maxey gets a triple-double for the first time in his career. Tyrese Maxey plays better when Joel Embiid is out on the floor. Now, we're going to kind of look at this and see how it affects Paul George as well. And I'm not saying Tyrese Maxey has been terrible, but his shot selection has been a little bit questionable. He was also coming off of that hamstring injury, so maybe that's why it was just a little bit out of cohesion for him as well. But finally, you look at him having a career night after Joel Embiid coming back and having a big night. And those two on the floor, it's just good to see them back once again. And Tyrese Maxey able to benefit off Joel Embiid coming back.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we think about it. He had 25 points on 10 for 22 shooting. He only made 3 of 12 3-pointers, but he had 11 rebounds, which is a career high. He had 14 assists, another career high. He did have 3 turnovers, but I'd take 14 assists and 3 turnovers any day, right? And he was a game best plus 21. But when you look at it, like I said, he shot 10 for 22. He had 25 points, but in the second half, 18 of those points came in the second half of 7 for 14 shooting. And as much as he played well, I think a lot of it was a result of the 2-man game and how Joel Embiid takes a lot of pressure off of him. Like, a chunk of his assists came to Joel, but at the same time, it's like, it's funny. Joel's presence, when he's on the floor, it frees up so much for Tyrese Maxey to do. Now, on this particular day, it just seemed like Tyrese kept giving him the ball, giving him the ball, giving him the ball. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now it's time for me to take my shots. But it's one of those things where you just can see like night and day. Beforehand, when Joel's not playing, Tyrese looks like a guy who's unsuccessfully trying to will them to win. Right now, he looked more like a guy who had more things under control, especially in the second half. He was getting to his spots. He was making some layups. He was getting some dishes. He was doing a lot of things. So, to me, the biggest takeaway from him, great, well-rounded game, but that presence of Joel Embiid just makes him a way better player when Joel's on the floor.
And it's not to say that in the long run, Tyrese Maxey can't be that main guy. And he's still going to have probably really big games. But having a big fella on the floor that condenses the defense of opposing teams, Joel draws so much attention that it frees up Tyrese Maxey. Their game together has been so fun to watch and develop over the years. And I think the biggest thing about Tyrese is the person that he is and the reason why fans across Philadelphia love him so much. And I look at it right now from an analyst point of view and I say, okay, well, a situation happened earlier in the year where Tyrese Maxey was holding Joel Embiid accountable. Now, we know that Joel Embiid, in terms of having his co-stars, maybe they didn't get along, aka Ben Simmons a little bit, hearing stories from there. But Tyrese Maxey did what he needed to do. He approached his franchise player and said, listen, you need to get better at this because this is not a good look for our team and what are other players going to think. And then Tyrese Maxey goes out there and they have the 2-man game that we know that they can have on the floor. So that's not only showing what Tyrese Maxey can do. He's an unselfish player. He felt more comfortable, more in his zone. Just the maturity of Tyrese Maxey, being able to go out there, putting that behind him quickly and saying, let's go play some ball. The big fella's back on the floor, and this is what the 76ers do best. So in this situation, I know it's been a tough year for Tyrese in the sense of he's played a lot of different roles, but it's a really big growing year for him, seeing how he's been able to do it behind the scenes as well. And he's one of the only people, Keith, that's had faith in this team still when things aren't looking too good.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He's one of the people. I mean, here's the thing: you got to think about it. So, Tyrese had that conversation with Joel. They go on the next game. They lose a close one to the Memphis Grizzlies. They end up losing by 6. No, yeah, by 6 points. And at the time, we were like, okay, that was a good loss because when you look at it, that's a game where now this is right after he had that meeting, right after the Toronto Raptors game.
Right.
So you look at it and you say to yourself, like, okay, Paul George goes out early in the third quarter. The Sixers get days and then they make a comeback. And everybody is hyped up over the recently where they won 4 of their last 5 games. But to me, the big thing is at that point, they won 5 of 8. So they lost that one to the Nets, right? I mean, to the Grizzlies. Then they come back and they beat the Brooklyn Nets. They do get boat raced by the Clippers, but then they lose to the Rockets in overtime, a close game. Then they beat the Pistons and the Hornets back to back. They lose by 4 points in OT to the Magic, and then all of a sudden they beat the Magic by 8 points. And then they go to Chicago and they win that one. So to me, it's like when Tyrese Maxey had that conversation, the 76ers turned their fate. Like they went from being a team that was struggling, losing, getting blown out by squads, to a team that basically said, you know what, we're going to play tougher, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And again, like I say, we all think about them winning 4 out of 5, but to me, it's the 5 games that they played, and they only were blown out in one time. So they could easily be 7. They easily could have won 7 of 8 games, right? Easily. So to me, and that's all attributed to Tyrese Maxey's leadership and everything like that. So, you got to commend the guy for helping his team turn it around.
Yeah, he's matured and he's grown a lot just throughout this season, probably when he didn't even think that he needed to. I think the one thing I do look at though was Paul George in that game. The two-man game was working, the three-man game not so much. And you like to see the positivity. Once again, it's one game. You like to see the positive note of Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid able to kind of have that back and forth. But Keith, we all know that come playoff time, you are going to need a third guy. So how does this team get Paul George a little bit more involved? Does he need to be more aggressive, find his place? I think the biggest thing, they're going to have to play more games together. I still don't think that chemistry is there. I mean, how could it be? It's been so tough for these three to be on the floor at the same time, especially before the game that Joel just came back in. But to me, Paul George has to be a little bit more involved in the offensive game plan because there's going to be a time where he's really going to need to step up. And it can't just be, oh, out of nowhere, PG, you got to take over. They've got to figure out how to also make him work throughout this team with a two-man game, making it a three-man game between them.
Yeah, I agree. So here's the thing, because, this was the problem they had last year. You go to the playoffs and you have Maxey and Embiid just dominating. And then the one game that they looked good was in what was a game 5 when Tobias Harris had a heck of a game, right? That was the only one that they had. So right now you look at Paul George and, it's funny because his previous 2 games, he had 29 points and 21 points. I mean, he was phenomenal. And this past game, you're expecting with Joel Embiid to come back. You're expecting Paul George to be extremely active again and facilitate some of the offense. He shot 6 for 13, which isn't bad, but he was 0 for 5 on threes, right? He barely had the ball in his hands. He did grab 7 rebounds. He had a block, and he had 2 assists. But when we look at it, he just wasn't involved as much. Now, he did have the third most shots, but he just wasn't involved as much. And they have to figure out a way to get him involved in order for them to have success, especially in the postseason.
That they do, and it needs to start soon. My takeaway from this, though, I'm no more 76ers tanking. I think that they can make a push here because of the competition in the Eastern Conference right now and some teams falling at this point. If Joel Embiid can stay healthy, we're going to wait and see. Once again, it is a big stretch through December that we are going to look at and really analyze and dive into in just a moment. How do we feel about those games, and also going into January, and where does Joel Embiid kind of fit in, and where is he needed as well? And with big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month, when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. $45 upfront payment required. New customers on a 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on the unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. Make sure you see Mint Mobile for details. All right. So the Sixers' schedule in December is really what we're going to dive into here. And not only that, but also looking at the January schedule. And we've kind of touched on it earlier, talking about Joel Embiid. But my biggest thing is, and I really don't like to say there's must-need wins in this early of the season, but I do think that these are necessarily must-need. And I say that because you can start to give yourself some momentum. You can see how Joel Embiid can play. So the Pacers, that's a game they can win. The Hornets games, they can win, but Joel probably won't play in that 20th game if he plans to play the 21st against the Cavs, or he'll play in either or. So really, Keith, I mean, here I look at the Celtics, the Spurs, and the Cavs, and I say, okay, those might be tough games to win. Other than that, you look at the Jazz, the Trailblazers, the Hornets twice, and the Pacers. These are games that the Philadelphia 76ers can win. And once again, they are not far out from being 12th to possibly being 8th. Now, a lot of things have to happen with those other teams ahead of them, but still, they can really dig themselves out of a hole before the new year.
Yeah, they really can. I mean, it's set up nicely for them. I mean, especially we talked about early on the games you have in between, right? So you
Mhm.
look at it, and it's funny. I was on the phone with someone today, and they were talking about, well, if you know you can beat Charlotte, do you rest Joel on the 20th and then
Mhm.
have him go up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? So like let's just say if they do that, then maybe they could steal an extra one. But as you and I talked about beforehand, I think over their next 14 games, the 76ers should go 8-6 at the worst. You know what I mean? Like I expect them to beat Indiana. I expect them to beat Charlotte, right? We expect them to beat San Antonio, right? Utah, Portland, and then Brooklyn. Those are all victories that they should get, right? So I feel like they're going to be in pretty good hands, but also I feel like this stretch right here is going to be extremely defining for them. Like we talked about before, defining in regards to Joel's health, but also defining and saying how good can this team be? Can this team, is it going to be able to weather this storm, so to speak, to whereas they can climb back up in the standings a little bit and be in position to get a play in, right? And then possibly move on from there. So I do think they have a lot of winnable games, but also like this is going to show us just how good this 76ers team can be.
And we're not saying that they can't win against the Cavs or the Celtics. I don't think it's going to happen, but maybe it could happen. You never know. Maybe a little bit of a Christmas present that they defeat the Celtics on Christmas Day, December 25th. But you look at that too, and it really comes to fruition with the January schedule because, the matchups aren't necessarily extremely tough, but you look right off the bat, January 1, January 2nd, you have a back to back for the Philadelphia 76ers. Then it's the 4th, then it's the 6th. There's games every other day. So the defining moment of figuring out if Joel can play in these games coming up in December while having this rest is also going to go into January. And that is why it is so important because that's going to be a very tough schedule going into the new year if Joel isn't healthy. So I think these are absolutely must win games right now in December because Joel may need some time off when it comes January. It's going to be an interesting stretch. We're going to see. Don't forget, too, I mean, Keith, we talk a lot about Joel Embiid and him sitting. Paul George also has said in the beginning of the season he's not going to play back-to-backs, and he's been sitting out some games. So we also have to think about that because this team could be without PG or Joel Embiid, I feel like, at any given moment at this point of the season. So in December, I look at it right now and I say, okay, if you can sneak some wins in there with the Celtics and the Cavs, great. But those other games absolutely need to win. And that can define the rest of the season for the Philadelphia
Oh, no
76ers.
doubt. They need to win these games. Those are like must win. And I know people don't want to hear that. And then, but it also goes into January because you're going to have a tough game against Sacramento, a tough game against
Mhm.
Golden State on back to back. But that Brooklyn game, they should win, right? So then all of a sudden, after Brooklyn, they play Phoenix. But then they start a 3-game homestand. But then they have the Washington Wizards, who have the worst record in the league. And then 2 days later, they play the New Orleans Pelicans, who have the second worst record. And then, they go to Orlando. Now, what we heard is Franz Wagner is out for extended time. We know Paolo, their best player, he's out right now. So, this is another winnable game. They just beat them. And then they go to OKC, which is going to be tough. They go to they play OKC, they play New York, but then they have Indiana again. So these are all games like this Indiana game, this Orlando game, this Washington Wizards, this New Orleans game, the Brooklyn game. These are all games that they're going to start the beginning of the year that they need to win. They do. They need to win these games. They need to take advantage of this, and then they can help this propel them, later on in the season.
And what I have to say to people too, that'll probably say, well, must win games in December, you guys are crazy. The 76ers put themselves in this position. They dug
Exactly.
themselves into a hole and they need to get themselves out. And this is an opportunity to get themselves out. Because what do you want in a situation where you're getting near All-Star weekend or your February or your March, in situations where you're like, all right, well, the 76ers might get the 8th seed and we don't know if Joel Embiid is going to be healthy. You can't be in that situation. They need to start figuring it out now. And it looks like last game they started to figure it out in a very, very small sample size. So it's one game. We can't get too excited about that. And I know people want to say, all right, the Sixers are back. Let's go. But the reality of the situation is this month of December and the beginning of January is going to be very, very telling for this team, the health of Joel Embiid, what PG can do, how he can fit in, and where the 76ers team might end up. Because the Eastern Conference right now, when you look at it, those seeds in the bottom where you could be in playing in terms of 8 and 7, they could be up for grabs for this Philadelphia 76ers team. That is a realistic look at things at this point. But I want to go into some grading. At this point of the season, the Philadelphia 76ers, there's been some really bad, rocky, rough times with this team. You've seen a little bit of positive, especially as of late. So I'm going to give them a C- to a D at this point of the season. And I only rate them that high because I think you look at Joel Embiid and hopefully the worst is behind him in the situations where he doesn't perform as bad as he did before. He can be injured, he can be fighting an injury, but the lack of effort we saw from him before, absolutely unacceptable. So it seems like maybe he's coming back to the Joel Embiid that we all know that he's a dominant player. And I think that can set up this team for success going forward. So based off that, I'm going to go C-, D range. Keith, where are you putting them at on your report card?
I mean, look, to me, oh wow, it's a tough one because I still have them hovering around the F, like real rat.
Fair. Yep.
Because the thing is, they were the most disappointing team early on.
True.
Joel Embiid came back and played like we know he can, one game, but it was a game where he missed the previous 7, resting. So now we have to figure out and see what he can do moving forward. Granted, it was a good performance, but also was a performance against a team that can't make any stops either, a team that struggles mightily on the defensive end. So while it was a glimmer of hope for the 76ers in that one game, they have to do it over a larger sample size because, it was a point in time where we were all saying doom and gloom. Everybody was like, the sky is falling. Then they win one game, and now everybody's like, oh, they're back, they're back, they're back. And I'm like, hit the pause button for a second. We have to see it over an extended period of time. So right now, I'm giving it an incomplete, but if I see what I don't like in a couple games, they're going back to an F. They're going to an F.
Yeah, mine might lower depending on these next few games for the Philadelphia 76ers, or it could raise. It's all up to the 76ers. Once again, they put themselves in this position, and now they do have a chance this season where at some parts of the year it didn't look like it, but now they have a chance to dig themselves out of that hole. It's going to be a really telling rest of the month of December. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On 76ers. Let us know your thoughts in the comments if you believe in this team or you think that, it's not too good to be true. It was one good game and they're just going to go back to the ways that they were in the beginning of the year. Let us know your thoughts, and we will be joining you all once again with even more coming up tomorrow. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Locked On 76ers. For Keith Pompey, I'm Kayla Santiago saying so long, and we'll see you next time.